Welcome to the On-Premise IT Roundtable, the only podcast that dares to be both on topic and on location. My name is Tom Hollingsworth, and I am a part of Gestalt IT. And each time we meet, we bring to you some of the opinions and discussion topics of IT luminaries across the enterprise space around a variety of topics. I'd like to take a moment for our guests today to introduce themselves before we jump into today's premise, starting with Calvin.
Yeah, my name is Calvin Hendrix Parker. I'm with 6 Feet Up. You can find me on Twitter at CalvinHP, and our blog is at 6feetup.com/blog.
All right, and Arthur?
Hi, I'm Arthur Baig. I'm an enterprise solutions architect. I focus on both private and public cloud environments, infrastructure mainly. And you can find me on my blog, arthurbaig.com, and my Twitter handle is also arthurbaig.
All right, well, thank you very much for joining us today. Let's dive into the premise of today's episode. With a couple of great cloud architects, you already know that we're going to be talking about cloud. And one of the hottest topics out there is multi-cloud. Everywhere I go, I keep hearing about how important and advantageous it is for us to be moving into multi-cloud. As a matter of fact, I even recorded a recent episode of Conversations about multi-cloud. And one of the things that I brought up is that a lot of people are trying to find justifications to do multi-cloud without really needing it. And one of the most common justifications that I hear is high availability. If I deploy my application to more than one cloud, then I'm going to be fault tolerant and resilient, and I'm never going to go down, and my customers are going to love it. And I think that that's a load of crap, because fault tolerance is the worst reason to try to justify multi-cloud. So when we were doing the warm up for this, we started getting a lot of good opinions about this. I'm actually going to start off with Arthur first. Arthur, do you believe that high availability is a good justification to go multi-cloud?
To be fair, some might actually prefer that, but in my view, I don't think that high availability alone or specifically is a good reason to do multi-cloud. My view is, and I've worked with customers where they've done multi-cloud for other good reasons. One reason being, for example, them having applications that actually work better on one cloud than the other. So they have applications that work better on specific clouds. And for that reason, or specifically skilled teams who actually are very proficient in that particular cloud. So they want to take advantage of it and deploy their applications in those clouds as needed. So that would be a very good reason to go multi-cloud.
Okay. I mean, I can see the argument for that is, there's a lot of other reasons, and more often than not, cost is usually the reason. That's what people are really secretly not wanting to say is, I'm not doing this because it's super technically advanced and wonderful. It's because I'm a cheapskate. Now, Calvin, what are your thoughts?
I think that they're going to head the other direction. It's going to be way more expensive to accomplish this. Plus, Arthur brought up a good point about skill sets. How many unicorns are you going to find that have that robust of a skill set in multiple clouds simultaneously? So finding the talent to be able to manage a multi-cloud and manage that set of complexities to really make that work across two public clouds or public cloud, private cloud, I think is kind of crazy to think that that's feasible. Although I see them trying it. They think that this is the enterprisey way to go, to have across, I need to split my risk across two clouds. But what's your real gain there? I think you're just adding more complexity onto the stack. You're adding more points of failure, trying to add in less points of failure because there's just more moving pieces to manage. And I don't think it's there's so much to the cloud native environment these days to keep in one developer's head or one DevOps head that they're going to fail miserably trying to do it, to do it with any kind of grace.
I don't think that point can be understated enough, that people seem to think that if you put things in two different clouds, that it is magically fault tolerant, and it's not. And I can prove this to you. I want you to go take your last reliable backup that you got from any one of your systems. Now I want you to deploy that backup onto a completely different set of hardware. Like, you can even keep the same operating system. I just want you to take it from a Dell server and deploy it on an HP server, like a bare metal backup. You let me know how that goes. I'll be back in a week. And if you've got it working, it'll be a miracle. Now, multiply that by about 10,000, and that's multi-cloud, because it is not easy to take all of the skill set from one hyper-specialized system and move it over to another and just assume that workloads are going to fail from one direction to the other on their own.
Right.
And that's
go ahead,
why
Adar.
I wanted to say that, right from the start, that fault tolerance or high availability may not be the best reason for that. And yes, you're completely right. You won't be able to run the same. So for example, how would you be able to restore those, the EC2 instances on Azure? Maybe an operating system level backup might restore. But the point is that I'm not talking about such customers, such use cases. What I'm talking about is where the organization does have those teams, and they may not be necessarily dealing with the same kind of application stacks or even applications. I work with customers, and especially, I'm not talking about smaller teams, smaller customers. I'm talking about larger organizations who actually do not only, there is some sort of strategic decision as well, in the sense of they don't want to completely tie themselves down to one cloud, but it's not about that specifically. It's more about where, so for example, they have this inbuilt belief, for example, that one cloud might be good with machine learning and intelligence, artificial intelligence type stuff. So their workloads will run on that. Whereas they can also, or they want to take advantage of, so for example, just infrastructure, right? And their infrastructure works better or integrates well with another cloud. I can actually tell you one specific reason why certain organizations with a certain kind of operating system licensing want to go to a certain cloud, right? And it works a lot better for them in terms of cost. In fact, that's their selling point pretty much. So in that specific scenario, they definitely go for multi-cloud, because in some cases I've seen have thousands or millions worth saved in just licensing costs alone.
Yeah, but I see enterprises now, you're basically crippling yourself or tying one hand behind your back to try and accomplish that, because you now have to go to the least common denominator. And instead of being able to leverage the cloud native components of one cloud to the more fullest extent, you have to make sure you're running straight VMs, and you have to do configuration management and all the other pieces to bring up the components of your applications, where I could just be running in AWS, like the RDS for my databases, be using ALBs or ELBs for my load balancers, and I'm not worried about configuring those things on my own, doing handcrafting every piece of this pipeline that delivers my application. I want to be able to innovate, and to be able to innovate at speed, I want to not worry about those pieces of the infrastructure equation. I want to be able to just deploy my application, deal with the app part of it. I mean, containers has helped tremendously here, but even running containers don't just go cross cloud. You've got different configuration preferences and scaling properties between the various hosted Kubernetes options that are in each of the clouds. So I don't think you can even run a container cross cloud successfully without having a lot of overhead to try and do it.
But my point basically is that why do you need to in all cases? Because
right.
Like I said, if your applications and your teams and your skills are completely separate, so for example, in a silo, apart from authentication mechanisms or those kind of things where things do overlap, the rest of the things can be separated, especially in cases where your teams are used to, for example, running automated systems or
right. I
deployments.
see one issue with that. If you are talking about like ML, AI, big data, if you're trying to use multi-cloud to do that, you're going to be paying a lot in transfer. I think everyone knows that the cloud providers, they really get you on transfer. And so that's a really key way for them to basically say, you can do that, great, but you're going to pay a lot of money to get the data from over there to over here and back again.
What's to say that you have to transfer that resultant data to the other cloud? Why can't you have it in the same cloud? Because it's all about the results, right?
Right.
And you can have results handled in the same cloud, whereas the other cloud is running completely different applications and different purposes.
I don't disagree. I think that's kind of an optimistic, rosy view. I think there's going to be a lot of messiness going between the two clouds, where maybe all the different teams and departments aren't coordinating what data they need to have in each place. And so you're going to have more orchestration of the people and where they're going to put their data for their applications to really optimize your costs. I don't disagree that there are definitely clouds that are better at like an AI ML solution than others, and you may want to leverage that. But I think that does that is it really that much better, or should you work on tuning and running your own models in the cloud that maybe is less tuned to having like the AI as a service bit ready for you to go?
And I think the main reason for doing those kind of two things, having multiple clouds to deal with, is I see two main reasons, like I was mentioning. One is when a particular application that they want to run, the organization and their teams are very skilled in that, and they have trust that whatever they want to do is actually completely without fail the reason why they will want to go to that cloud. And the other is actually when they determine that the workload is so big that if they run it on that particular cloud, they get more cloud economics out of it. So in those bigger cases, and when thousands of whatever currency you deal with is involved, or sometimes millions, it does make it worth do the effort or deal with the complexity where your savings are substantial. And that's one of the bigger drivers for accepting that complexity, as you put it.
Mm-hmm.
So let me ask this question, because this is, I mean, you guys have done a really great job of debating all of the reasons why I should potentially look at multi-cloud. And it sounds like the very first thing we said was, who cares about fault tolerance? Because as you brought up, like, your skill set can't split between two different clouds. Your data transfer costs are going to skyrocket if you're trying to move things back and forth between clouds. There's a lot of things. Well, if that's the case, then why does everybody tell me that, oh, well, I'm doing this because I want to be fault tolerant, because I want to make sure that nothing is going to happen when Amazon goes down? And worse yet, when I ask them, oh, okay, so you have two instances running in US East 1 and US West 1, and they go, well, no, I'm gonna run it in Azure and AWS at the same time. Like, why are they so hell bent on making multi-cloud their solution to whatever problem they've got, when they won't even take advantage of the fault tolerance in the one cloud they're running
in? That baffles me as well. I again, it's very easy to configure these systems these days with tools like Terraform or CloudFormation or whatever technology maybe that specific cloud gives you, to be able to deploy automatically across multiple availability zones, even in one region. Nevertheless, using another region and having that replication. A lot of the cloud providers, if you leverage their native tools, again, I'm not one for like maybe getting vendor locked into a specific cloud, but I will say there's a lot of advantages to using the tools that are just provided to you by that cloud vendor. I mean, being able to replicate an RDS database automatically to another region, literally check the box, and your data is sitting in another region ready for you to warm up and go. Another thing people talk about with the high availability that they don't talk about and should be is really mean time to recovery. I think as much as effort I've seen go into trying to make things highly available, you could have done half the effort in making the recovery time faster and probably had less failures and been back online quicker because of the complexity that goes into truly building a highly available system.
Yeah, and I agree with that, because cloud, so the tools native to the cloud, an example of where an organization may or should be taking advantage of the tools that are natively built into, and the fault tolerance natively built into those cloud environments, because they've invested a lot of money, a lot of technology and infrastructure to provide you with those services. So that's one thing that you should be first looking into. But also to the point about the recovery, if you are actually designing, not keeping those or not taking advantage of those facilities that are available to you, and actually trying to look at multi-cloud as the solution rather than better design, then that definitely is not the way to go. This is, if that's the arguments being presented, that I also can't understand it. I think more effort should be put into actually investigating which tools you should be using and how to better design your environment rather than going multi-cloud just for fault tolerance.
Right. I feel like you see a lot of times folks throwing tools at the problem, and more tools are not the answer. I think you need to simplify and understand how it truly should be delivered, as opposed to like, oh, we can buy some off-the-shelf tool that claims it'll give us extra nines of availability. I will also say they're probably lying to you. You need to be able to recover a system fast. If I can have a total outage in a whole region on AWS, which is also very unlikely, but have my data sitting warm in another region, and all I have to do is spin up my VMs or my containers to start serving the data, I'm back online in minutes, if not less.
I mean, that makes sense to me. And that's one of those things that I feel like it's the only way you can get executives to pay attention to what you want to do is not, I'm going to spend less money, or in some cases, I'm going to spend more money, or I'm going to need more teams to manage this. It's our things won't go down. But they need it to be big, and they need it to be flashy, and they need it to be cool, because let's be fair. Most of the people who say they're doing multi-cloud, if you pin them down on what they're actually doing, can't tell you what they're doing in multi-cloud. It's those surveys that get sent out to the executives at the companies by all the analyst firms who are like, are you doing multi-cloud? Yes or no? Do you know which clouds you're doing multi-cloud in? Because a lot of the things that I've seen from the practitioner side also are accidental multi-cloud deployments. It's like, oh, hey, we had everything that we standardized over here in AWS, and then all of a sudden we needed to pull in this database that only runs on Oracle. Well, crap. Now we're a multi-cloud company we didn't really want to be. And so, that, and like you mentioned, Calvin, that increases your fault tolerance footprint, because what happens, and we've seen this multiple times over even the last year when we've been relying on cloud, is like what happens when US East 1 goes down, and suddenly a whole bunch of services just blink out because we didn't realize that we were utilizing them, like dynamic DNS. So does the accidental multi-cloud problem even belie the fault tolerance more by saying, hey, we've done a great job of deploying to all these availability zones, and we have our application going on and all of their stuff, but we can't be 100% fault tolerant because we rely on this one thing over here in the corner of the world that we have to have. They
have to refactor. You have to look at your design of that application and then refactor that piece out.
I really wish that I had a pair of pearls that I could clutch right now. So basically what you're telling me is I have to go back to my developers and tell them to rewrite their code to not be a shoddy piece of filth?
Absolutely. This is the developer speaking in the room. I think there's a lot of value in that. I think a lot of times people, they will hold on to their code like it's so valuable, but they need to be willing to refactor. I think that they need to be willing to move their code into a modern era. You can start by lifting and shifting your applications out of the data center into a cloud, but you can be paying more unless you refactor that code to use the native tools that are in those clouds.
Yes, and I completely wholeheartedly agree that if you're going to a public cloud environment, then you should be looking at refactoring now. But I would also say that that in reality, a lot of organizations, especially if the code that we are talking about has been written like, I don't know, in the 80s or something like that, then companies are very, very hesitant in actually touching it, even with a barge pole, and that they basically just try to live with it, which is unfortunate but true. And I've seen many organizations actually just lifting and shifting to say VMware cloud environments just up in the cloud, and keep it there for that reason.
You guys are making me want to sit back in a rocking chair and stroke a big long white beard and go, back in my day when developers didn't want to rewrite their applications to run in 2 separate data centers, I had to do things like vMotion and layer 2 data center interconnect because apps don't understand how to work when an IP address changes. And now, the developers, the grown-ups in the room are saying, yeah, you got to rewrite everything because it needs to actually be able to survive a hit like that. And I can't tell you how many times someone's told me, oh, well, our code is, it needs to be more like Netflix. I'm like, do you understand the amount of engineering that goes into how Netflix can survive US East 1 going down?
And the amount of test coverage that their developers have put into making sure that if they do refactor a piece of code, they're sure it's going to work.
Yeah. Well, somebody was asking me the other day about something like chaos engineering. It's like, what do you feel about that? I'm like, yeah, Netflix is crazy enough to let a little script run around in their system and wreck things on purpose because they know their code is really tight. That is like a completely different level of fault tolerance. It's not just deploying to multiple clouds. It's saying this thing is so bulletproof, I'm going to let you take the wheels off of it while it's driving, and it's going to work. And I don't think any company in the world, aside from maybe Netflix and 2 or 3 others, that is thinking in those terms, that goes out and goes, oh, our code's as good as Netflix. No, it's not. I don't care if you've deployed one thing on GCE and one thing over here on a little AWS instance. That doesn't make you fault tolerant unless your application knows how to work between the two.
That's 100% true. I think the applications need to be able to be released to hundreds of times a day. There's not these release parties on the weekends. where you get everybody on a conference bridge. The application code, the changes need to be small. The changes need to be frequent. They need to be able to roll out in a moment's notice so that a bug is detected, or if an outage starts to precipitate through the environment because of a code change, it has to be minutes to seconds that you can get that change back out. And then at that point, you can now run anywhere you want with this code, because it can react and heal, or at least recover, very, very quickly.
Yeah, and that is basically nirvana, isn't it? I mean, that's the thing that you're basically looking for. And again, I keep going back to the customers I normally work with, which are mainly enterprise customers. But even in those organizations, even though they are striving to get there, that's what their end goal is. Again, in reality, what I see most of the cases is that they haven't actually reached it. They aim to get there one day, but they are currently in some part of their organization, even if it's like small applications or bigger ones, they are not completely they don't have automated pipelines in that sense.
Well, then they shouldn't be in multiple clouds. If they can't get an automated pipeline, you're not allowed to be in multiple clouds simultaneously.
Well, I actually separate both of those out in the sense that, if, for example, again, it's not about just automated deployment that actually makes them go to as I was saying earlier. I mean, there are their own ways of doing things. If their teams can deal with manually the infrastructure, they're quite happy to do that because of the savings and the other benefits they're reaping. It's like I said, I mean, it's not about just having to or being able to deploy in an automated and cloud native fashion. That's not a requirement to be in the cloud, is it? I mean, realistically speaking, as long as you can operate it properly to your service levels, it should be fine.
To truly take advantage of it, though, I think you had better be, or you should just be back in a data center on bare metal. You're going to save more money on infrastructure, but you're going to be spending a lot more money on human capital to be able to manage that infrastructure. But then when you come down to
an argument, and like I said, it's an idealistic view, and I'm pretty sure that all organizations want to go there and get there at one day. But reality again is that many are, well, almost none are at that stage. Very few are. I mean, if you're talking about Google's or Netflix's of this world, then yes, they will be in that situation. They practically have developed these products and their methods, but in reality, most of the organizations are far from it at this point.
Maybe that's the problem. Maybe that, like you guys have alluded to, it's not multi-cloud that makes you fault tolerant. It's all of the things you have to build on the back end to get you to the point where you can be deployed on multi-cloud that make you fault tolerant. It's the old adage of doing a process and then having a thing you have to do before you can even do the process. And it turns out that the process before what you did is really the hard part. And people just assume that because that was the last step, that's the magic where everything happens. And people just want to jump there because they read a report that says multi-cloud is 25% more available than any other thing. And they immediately look at the bottom line instead of seeing all the line items above it. It's like, oh yeah, I have an automated deployment line, and I have multiple teams that are capable of doing this. And I can do 20, 30, 50, 100 code commits a day without crashing my system. If they would start at the beginning of the journey instead of wanting to get right to the end, maybe they would solve their availability problems along the way, as well as reducing all of their costs and finding better ways to code their applications. But we're just a results-driven society that wants the end result right now without having to do any of the hard work. It's every fad diet you've ever seen. And maybe that's the problem. Multi-cloud is essentially a fad diet.
It's a fad diet. I think that you need to do the hard work up front, like you said, to make the foundation for where you're building your application. The benefits, more than just recovery time and availability, are going to be developer satisfaction. Those developers are going to be a lot happier not slogging through a bunch of tech debt, old systems, archaic code, legacy systems. If you can give them an opportunity, or at least a light at the end of the tunnel, that we can start building toward modern processes using modern tools, actually reducing the amount of code in our code base along the way, because there's better frameworks today. There are better tools for packaging and deploying the applications into containers. There's better tools for managing the orchestration of the infrastructure itself, like Kubernetes or Terraform and things like that. There's so much better tooling out there. I think a lot of these other engineers probably would just be lovely to have Git. They would love to get to that point.
Yeah.
And like I was saying, absolutely agree with all these sentiments. What happens is that, like I said, organizations want to get there. But, what do you do about that head of the organization who goes to a particular conference and says, well, I want to be in the cloud in 6 months, right? All my applications should be running there. And they don't really are thinking about how difficult it would be to refactor all those applications, get everyone trained up and all those kind of things, and do the best job ever to start with. All they care about is that, they should go to the cloud in like the next 6 months, they should be there. So a lot of organizations end up you just lifting and shifting and say, well, okay, we'll refactor some other day. And that other day never comes.
Yeah, never comes.
It takes a very long time to do it. And unfortunately, most organizations are in that situation. I must say that I have seen some organizations who actually started doing it later on. But obviously their priority once they lift and shift is to get everything stabilized. And, and that takes a while before they start, properly refactoring.
And I think maybe that's the problem, is that so much of the hype that we're seeing is that you have to do this. You need to be in the cloud in 6 months or you're failing at business. Or worse, you're a publicly traded company and your investors tell you that you need to move to the cloud, and next quarter they penalize your stock price because you don't. And that causes people to scramble. It is last minute solutions to impossible problems created by other people. And the way that we fix those is not fixing process, training people better. It's you have an unlimited budget to go buy a tool to lift and shift everything into the cloud. And while you're at it, they told me that you need to be in more than one in case something happens. So just do it in both and we'll fix the problem later. And you can just see the gigantic roll of cloud-shaped duct tape that's being stretched out to paste over the top of this stuff until someone forgets about it. And then it becomes this massive pile of technical debt that your team has left and the new guys don't know what to do. So they redeploy it to another cloud because that's the easiest solution. And maybe that's the problem ultimately, is that nobody cares enough to answer the question, why do we need to go multi-cloud? Not should we, why should we? And it's almost like, the old stories of the Roman triumphs where they had someone riding in the chariot with the general going, fame is fleeting, and you are not as good as you think you are. The CEO needs somebody to walk behind him at these trade shows and go, multi-cloud is important. No, it's not. You need to move to multi-cloud. No, you don't.
So who would be the brave person who tells?
Yeah, I don't know.
I volunteer as tribute, mostly because it's easier to change their mind right after the analyst gets a hold of them and tells them how important this is than after they've been on the plane for the last 7 hours reading Forbes articles about how important multi-cloud is, and they just won't get it out of their brain. But I mean, ultimately, I think we've shot this premise completely to death that HA and fault tolerance is the worst reason to go to multi-cloud. But I'm gonna pose this question to both of you gentlemen. If you had to pick one and only one reason as the justification to do multi-cloud, what would it be? Ather.
So I think if you have the skills and the knowledge to run your apps in a particular cloud, and support it well for your customers or internal customers, then I think that would be one valid reason to go multi-cloud.
The valid reason for me for going multi-cloud is going to be specialized services. If you need something like Bigtable, or if you need AutoML, GCP is going to be where it's at. If you are looking at the SageMaker tools and you've got specialization, maybe get back to skills there too. But there's definitely some pieces in certain clouds where maybe it runs better, faster. You're going to get a better result for less money in that other cloud, then I would do it. But otherwise, I think it'd be worth looking at your design of your application and getting back into leveraging one cloud.
I would say, let's just be honest with yourself. The real reason that you want to go multi-cloud is because you're a cheapskate and because you want to have numbers on the bottom line that are hard numbers that you can pull from the internet and not related to how much in time you're investing in your teams and how much tooling you're having to invest and how much refactoring your code you're going to have to do. Because quite honestly, those resources are sunk costs and you don't care about them.
Yeah, I know, Tom, you get what you pay for. You're going to get what you pay for.
But let's be fair. It's the worst. It's the second worst reason, because we all know that high availability is the worst reason. It's the second worst reason to do it, but it's the most honest reason for most people because that's what they're going to say anyway.
Yeah.
Well, in case of licensing, it might actually be true.
Yeah.
Like I said, I've seen millions being saved that way.
I think that's up to the people to do the investigative work to actually justify their multi-cloud strategy instead of using the cherry-picked checkbox at the top that says high availability. All right, well, that will just about do it for this episode. Thank you very much for tuning in, each and every one of you. We appreciate your viewership and your listenership. If you would like to find the latest episode of our On-Premise IT Roundtable, please head over to the website, gestaltit.com/podcast, where you can find our episodes. You can also subscribe to our podcast feed in your favorite podcast application of choice. And if you do, we'd love it if you'd leave us a rating and a review, because people really do read those things, and it really helps them decide if this is their particular S3 bucket of choice to listen to. But we're going to go ahead and sign off. I've got some refactoring that I need to do around here, but for our great guests and for our Gestalt IT community, I want to thank you very much for tuning in, and we will see you in the next episode.